Hi, I'm Dr. Matt B., and these are your emotional minutes. And I'm actually working today out of an office at a university, and a lot of people have started to come back to working in offices or public places. And it's the late summer of 2021, and we've actually been in the COVID-19 pandemic for the last year and a half. And this has really been a difficult last year and a half for a number of people. People have experienced things like depression, stress, anxiety. And it really has legitimately been a difficult experience. People have started to refer to the pandemic as a trauma or a traumatic experience itself. And sometimes people will talk about things that are emotionally difficult as traumas as well, things like being reprimanded by a supervisor at work, for example. But really, these things would not be referred to as trauma or traumatic events by behavioral scientists. Now, of course, things like the pandemic have been legitimately difficult in sort of an emotional sense. And things like work stress and everything like that can actually be legitimately difficult as well. But the reason that these aren't referred to as kind of traumas or traumatic events by behavioral science is really that term trauma is really thought up or sort of designated for when people experience sort of a very specific and immediate event that actually threatens one's physical health or their sense of safety, or puts them in a real state of fear, helplessness, or horror in the immediate moment. Now, sometimes people will say, well, hey, isn't the pandemic sort of a physically threatening thing because my health is threatened? And it really is actually a physically threatening thing, but it wouldn't be considered traumatic or a trauma because it doesn't have that sort of sense of immediacy, or it's this sort of discrete immediate event. And really these things, the stressors from the pandemic or workplace stressors, family stressors, things that are emotionally difficult are of course stressful and difficult. They just wouldn't be referred to as trauma for these reasons. So things that might be referred to as traumatic might be things like auto accidents, or physical or sexual assault, or combat experiences, things like that. And so somebody say, well, why? Who cares? If I'm experiencing something emotionally difficult, why not call it a trauma? And the reason that behavioral scientists really makes this distinction between something that's traumatic versus something that is legitimately stressful is really because it gives a sense of accuracy in both really describing and understanding certain conditions in life, but then also being able to diagnose things. So PTSD symptoms, or really symptoms that might occur from a traumatic event, are often actually characteristically different than things that can occur from sort of general stressful events or other types of stressful events. So it's similar to a doctor referring to a fracture as different from a sprain because it's actually describing a different process and a different experience. Although both fractures and sprains are really painful, they actually have different experiences and different outcomes for the body. So trauma versus other types of stress actually have sort of different experiences and different emotional outcomes. And so if you're curious about what some of those differences are, or some of those unique experiences that make trauma or post-traumatic stress different than outcomes from other stress, I'll actually put some links in the post, both to a video that we talked about previously here on Emotional Minutes about trauma, but then also some links to some books and some other resources that really describe those experiences. And so hopefully that was helpful today in talking about sort of the difference between trauma and then other types of stress or stressful experiences. And if you have experienced and you feel like these have really been affecting your life, then I always recommend contacting a mental health provider, no matter what it is, whether it's a traumatic experience or something that wouldn't be considered trauma, but is really legitimately difficult to experience. And again, I'm Dr. Matt B., and these are your Emotional Minutes, and we'll see you next time.